since we're in the US, you're all very familiar with State of the Nation addresses on an annual basis. I thought we would be a good idea to have a State of the IoT Nation to keep everyone honest. And who better to give us that address would be Matt Hatton from Transforma Insights.
I'm Matt Hatton, one of the founding partners at Transforma Insights. We have the luxury of speaking to all of these kind of companies, many other companies associated with providing connectivity and IoT, providing devices, providing services, deploying and developing applications. And that allows us to get a perspective on what's happening in the world of IoT. So Shane gave me this slight curveball, a state of the IoT nation in terms of everything that's happening in IoT. And I thought, okay, maybe I need to narrow that down a little bit. So what I've done, I pulled together some, what I think are the interesting areas that are interesting things that are happening within particularly cellular-based IoT, with a particular focus on 5G, all derived from a lot of conversations with a lot of people. Mark mentioned market forecasts. Here's our market forecast. It wouldn't be an analyst presentation without putting up some kind of numbers. So we're at about 1.5 billion connected devices, going to about 6 billion connected devices in 2032. 5G of that starts to become the dominant thing, and that's predominantly around these MMTC technologies, these massive machine type communications, so NB-IoT and LTM, including RedCap. I have my own opinions on RedCap. I'm more in the Luke Ibbetson's group than maybe the more positive view, but it'll come with time. Largely dominated by China today, but the rest of the world starts to catch up. The important thing with this is probably not really necessarily the numbers, although obviously everybody's looking at what the opportunity is, where they can find the big sales opportunities. But what I think is interesting is the implications for the space, for the IoT connectivity space. Effectively, you've got a market bifurcation. You've got at one end of the spectrum, you've got these low power, low cost sensor connecting technologies, the MWCs and LTEMs, and at the other end of the spectrum, you've got a high-end, high bandwidth, high revenue per connection set of technologies in the form of, or predominantly 5G new radio. And that has quite significant implications for the market as a whole, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. What I wanted to talk about, though, is first off, where are we using these 5G technologies? Because effectively the NB-IoT, LTM, the evolution of those technologies are 5G technologies. So MMTC, critical for a lot of energy and environmental use cases. You can see there things like smart grid. You've got environmental monitoring. I know there's a big theme within the show about this sort of environmental and IoT for good. So there's some tremendous use cases there. But again, this reflects this bifurcation. You've got these technologies which are used for connecting sensors, where you may be generating only maybe $1 of revenue per year. And at the other end of the spectrum, you've got use cases like connected vehicles, down towards the right-hand end of the chart, where obviously it's connecting using a 5G connection. It's generating potentially tens of dollars per month. How do you address both of those? And this is the big topic that's exercising most of the IoT connectivity providers at the moment. How do you deal with this price erosion, particularly at that low end of the space? And we talk about something called $1 IoT. If you have connectivity being sold at $1 per year, we're all probably familiar with the once offering of €10 for 10 years connectivity. And there's another example over here on the left, the more extreme example, that's $26 for 30 years worth of connectivity. I'm not sure whether the procurement department will still be around in 30 years to hold their feet to the flame over whether they're actually still delivering in 30 years. But that's another matter for another day. But you have these very, very low cost connections that need to be supported on the same networks. Well, not quite the same networks, but still supported within the environment of the network operators, with the same platforms and sales teams and channels to market as that high end of the market. And what you end up with is this erosion, price erosion. And I'm showing on the right-hand side the value-added connectivity, i.e. the revenue that's generated by network operators in North America over the course of the next 10 years. And as you can see, the revenue per connection is on a downward trajectory, which is to be expected. You have this dilution of the base with the addition of the low-power technologies, which aren't necessarily generating a huge amount of revenue in terms of connectivity revenue, but incredibly valuable in terms of large volumes. But if you're a connectivity provider, then what do you do? What's your approach to the space? How do you mitigate, how do you cope with this connectivity, pure connectivity price erosion? And we spend a lot of our time talking with the various players about what they're doing in this space. And there's a whole load of strategies and approaches that have been taken to coping with this price erosion. And that's almost the defining characteristic of the strategies of network operators as they address cellular-based IoT. So there's a few options. You can move up the stack. You'll hear a lot of my colleagues in the analyst space talking about, well, the value of IoT is all in providing the application. You've got to move up the stack and compete for fleet management and connected home and a whole bunch of other applications. And that's fair enough in some circumstances, but typically this is an incredibly aggressively competitive space that they might be looking at moving into, with lots and lots of incumbent players who have been doing this for a very, very long time. So there's a few opportunities in there, but it's relatively modest. And we've seen lots of examples where operators, where carriers have tried to move into that space, and they've had to sort of park their offerings, shall we say. You can move into a more consulting and advisory type space. And we're seeing a lot more of this type of approach. Recognition that this isn't a case of just throwing a bunch of technology over the fence at the customer and hoping that it sticks. Holding the hand of the customer as they go through the process of deploying, building, optimizing the solutions. And connectivity providers starting to get into that space a lot more. Some have always been in that space. There have been a number of interesting acquisitions in the space, but that's certainly one where we're seeing some significant moves. There's also horizontal capabilities, platform type plays. There was some allusion in the previous panel to topics around data analytics and taking data off IoT devices and making use of it. There are a number of players, the likes of Telefonica and Telia and several others, where actually the IoT department has been fused with their analytics department, with the view that actually a lot of the interesting stuff that they're able to do in analytics is based on IoT devices, and therefore it makes some sense to combine the two pieces. So they're looking at that opportunity. But that tends to be much more of a long-term play, we think. There's also a couple of other approaches you might take to the pure connectivity piece of the stack. One is consolidation. We've seen quite a significant roll-up in terms of MVNOs. We did a study back in November 2021 where we looked at the IoT MVNO landscape, and there are about 175 companies that we identified. And since then, something like a third of them have been involved in some form of M&A, either being the buying party or the acquired party or whatever. So there is some consolidation going on. On the MNO side of things, well, IoT is typically only about 2% of revenue. So would we expect MNO to MNO consolidation? Absolutely not. But we are seeing some interesting things. There's a spinning off of the Vodafone IoT unit, which is happening. A few other players are doing some interesting stuff about setting up their own MVNOs and having a multifaceted approach to how they address the market. So, or indeed, we've seen some other spinning out of IoT business units. So, some consolidation or moving around of the pieces in terms of how the market's addressed. Or when it comes to that pure play of connectivity, it's about hyperscaling. It's about working out how you can best address those billions of connected devices, hopefully scaling to tens of billions of connected devices, many of which will be generating only $1 of revenue per year. And that cuts across everything. It cuts across running more efficient networks. It cuts across middleware. It cuts across channels to market and the approach that your sales team might take to selling IoT. It's going to be a different approach for the forest fire monitoring solution versus the connected car solution. So you have to find different ways of supporting in different ways a low-touch, low-cost onboarding platform for that particular end of the market. And this is one example of that hyperscaling. There's an awful lot of things happening in this connectivity management platform space. This is the SIM management and various other adjacent sets of features that sit within those. So this is a Cisco Control Center and what was Ericsson IoT Accelerator, and you have Flow Live and Movoco, and there's a bunch of other companies in that space. But what we're seeing is carriers having a careful look at their approach to this, because this is a fundamental part of how they address the support for IoT connections, and cost becomes all important. So they look at, well, maybe I need a cheaper option. Maybe I need to find some other ways of approaching this space. So this is one illustration of that quest for, if you like, the addressing that low end of the IoT market. Typically not really a relevant thing at the high end, because you're still generating multiple dollars per month, so you can continue supporting on existing systems. But at the low end, looking around, seeing what options are available. Change of tack, slightly different topic now. What we've also seen evolving is the way in which multi-country connectivity is being supported. Historically, it was pretty much all done by roaming. Roaming works, it's been established and working for quite a long time. But during lockdown, we saw quite a clamp down on roaming from quite a number of players. It was often triggered by some of the carriers noting that the devices that were supposedly consumers roaming onto their network were still roaming onto their network. So probably weren't tourists traveling around. They were probably IoT devices. So we saw the introduction of some monthly recurring charges and a bit of a clamping down on this. We also seen the availability of new technologies in the form of remote SIM provisioning and eSIM to help support that, to localize the device onto the network. Probably most people in the audience are familiar with eSIM and the various formats that it takes. But we did some modeling of which of these technologies we expected to be the ones that dominate. And we see this SGP32, the latest variant that's coming in, that's much more of a pull model rather than a push, other way around, push rather than pull model, as being the likely dominant technology. And and we're seeing large proportion of the connections shifting across to making some use of this remote SIM provisioning, which is, we think, the natural way that multi-country connectivity will be supported. Obviously, there'll be some devices where you just you use the domestic SIM. If you're running a smart metering project in a single country, maybe that's a more appropriate thing. But we see this as coming in and being a quite a significant impact on the market. So if you're not already thinking about using eSIM, then certainly it's one to take a look at. Another very general overarching theme that I just want to touch on very, very quickly, which has some implications for how the market's evolving, is effectively we're seeing a migration from what was historically a set of hardware and infrastructure domains, is what we talk about, to a set of software domains. So you're seeing a sort of softwareization of how IoT connectivity is supported. I mentioned eSIM and remote SIM provisioning. Well, that's one example. You used to have a physical item that got plugged into a device, and now it's more about software-based profiles being switched. Core networks used to be on-premise, but now pretty much anybody can spin up a core network, certainly typically in collaboration with a partner, but all these things are possible. I talked already about connectivity management platforms. Well, the barriers to entry to providing that kind of software capability for SIM management, those barriers have been removed, and we see other examples. But effectively, what you've got is a removal of many of the barriers to entry into providing the connectivity in the connectivity space, which is part of the reason why we see this proliferation of alternative connectivity management platforms. Much more aggressive IoT MVNOs, not running networks, but providing a lot of very innovative products and services in the space, and making quite a lot of running in IoT. So you can think about this as being a kind of a pivot from operating hardware and infrastructure into IoT connectivity, moving much more into the software domain. Throwing a lot of isations and isms and so on at you in the course of this, but I want to throw a couple more. One's the concept of cross-optimization, and another is the concept of connected by design. So cross-optimization, this comes down to, if you go back 10 years ago or so, typically IoT was piggybacking on a bunch of technologies that weren't really developed and designed for IoT. So that might have been 2G and 3G and 4G networks even. It might have been operating systems on devices that weren't really designed for it. And the great news is we've got a whole set of technologies that are much more appropriate for IoT. And that's fantastic. What's slightly challenging is that those are typically designed for constrained environments. And so you have to make sure that all of those, the protocols, the connectivity technologies, the operating systems, the firmware, and so on, all work together and are cross-optimized. Cross-optimization, though, not quite enough. What you need to be doing is you can't bolt any of these things on at the end. You can't pick your connectivity technology at the end of the application design process. You need to be thinking about that connectivity technology as you are developing the application. You've probably all heard the expression secure by design. The idea that you don't just add the security in at the end, you're thinking about the security as you go. Well, this is the same principle here, connected by design. You're thinking about which connectivity technology you use right from the get-go with developing the application. So connected by design. We've got a bunch of white papers and stuff around that if you're interested in that topic. A couple of other things I just wanted to throw in at the end, because it's State of the Union. I'm supposed to be covering everything related to IoT, but NTN satellite, very interesting developments in release 17. Historically, we kind of always thought of satellite as being a separate technology from the cellular technologies, one that was used for shipping and some super remote applications that were generally very high value assets. But that's changed with some of the ways that companies are thinking about deploying NTN as a hybrid with cellular. So effectively combining cellular connectivity with satellite just to provide backup, redundancy, a guarantee that there will be some form of connectivity. So we see not just the availability of that technology, but the way that it's being combined with cellular as being a very interesting evolution. And one final one, lots and lots of regulatory obligations, more so than we ever saw in the past, that are coming through, that are certainly have critical implications for how IoT is being developed and deployed. And some of that is IoT specific, so things around security particularly, but then also about how data is managed. We've got the European Data Act, which has implications for making IoT data available to just about to the customers, and they can make use of any IoT data that the service providers have, and so that has quite significant implications for how companies in the IoT space might operate. So if you're not already thinking about the regulatory aspects, then it's certainly one you need to think about. And then my final slide is this one, which is everything else. Okay, so this is all the stuff that I didn't get to, more or less. there is a blog post on our website which is about all those other things that we pulled together based on all the conversations we had with network operators. I recommend you take a look. If you're interested, here's some details of how to get hold of our stuff. Back to you, Shane. Thank you.